Hello, I'm Adam Ferry. I'm an occupational therapist, and today I'm going to be talking about guidance and legislation. Often in my clinical experience, legislation in particular is used or perceived as being quite restrictive, so therefore it creates quite negative connotations. And actually what I want to do is to give the impression that legislation is actually used in our favour. Often when I'm talking to people, they'll say we are not able to provide this particular item because our managers or our commissioners say that we can't for this particular legislative reason. And actually what I want to get across is if you use legislation in the right way, then actually it's your friend. And it allows us to get what we want for our clients in their best interests. So for example, the Care Act. So under Section 1, the Care Act, which is labelled local responsibilities, it states that the primary objective is to promote individual well-being, which includes personal dignity, physical, mental and emotional well-being, control by the individual over day-to-day life, which includes over care and support, or support provided to the individual and the way in which it's provided, for domestic, family and personal relationships, suitability of living accommodation. So it goes further by stipulating that in implementing this, the local authority must have to consider the importance of beginning with the assumption that the client themselves is best placed to know what is best for their own health and well-being, which is really important for us in a client-centered profession. Because often in my experience, we feel like recommendations are being imposed on or telling clients what they are allowed to have and not allowed to have. Well, actually that legislation says they are best placed to know what's in the right thing for them. That's a really important shift in philosophy and application of something like the Care Act. The second bit of legislation that we can look at is the Housing Grants, Construction and Regeneration Act, which is of course where DFG comes from, and people normally just see that as DFG legislation, but that's the act that it comes from. In particular, with something like bathing, where we often speak to occupational therapists or where we're doing supervision with some of our occupational therapists, they talk about bathing or showering, and you end up in that conundrum of which is best for that individual. Well, actually, within the Act, it says that we facilitate access by the disabled occupant to, or provide the disabled occupant, a room in which there is a bath or shower or both. So understanding that legislation actually allows us to free up some of our options. There is nothing in that legislation that says it has to be bath or shower. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's always room to have both or that everybody's going to need both, but understanding what the legislation says allows us to truly apply it in a client-centered way. It's really important we know those things. Another piece of legislation for us to consider and for us to know about, especially when working children's services, is of course the Children's Act. Schedule 2 of the Children's Act outlines the range of services that we can provide, and it says that we should always look to minimise the effect on disabled children or their disabilities and give each child the opportunity to lead lives which are as normal as possible. And that term normal is obviously quite subjective, but I know as an occupational therapist and as a parent, it's normal for my children to access the bath. It's part of our normal nighttime bath routine. So why should we deny children the access to a bath? And actually, given the marketplace, there's no reason for us to do that anymore. And the legislation supports that. It is not restrictive. It supports our application of good, sound clinical reasoning with evidence. Next thing for us to think about, and it's not legislation, but and it won't get us what we want necessarily, but it's really important that we know about it, is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in that, it says that play is recognised as a fundamental human right. Again, as a parent and as an occupational therapist, I see what my children do in the bath, and it's predominantly play. They have a wash while they're in there, but they play in the bath. Again, I'm not suggesting that that might be the only place they can play. If you're working with a family where play in other areas is significantly inhibited, it's definitely important that you understand what it says in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, because it might then allow you to broaden your application for something like a bath because you are supporting play in that area. Essentially, what it's important for us to know is that legislation and guidance is not inhibitive. It is there to support us in our practice. At the minute, something particularly like the Care Act has never been more occupational therapy focused. There's never been something that has driven client-centred, holistic care more. And unless we know what the legislation and the guidance says ourselves, so it's not taking it third hand, it's not taking it that somebody else has told us it restricts us in this way. It's really important that as therapists we take responsibility for knowing what the legislation says. And you might not know verbatim the whole document, but pick out the pertinent things to your role. If you do that, you can apply them in a way that supports you practicing in a truly holistic, client-centered way to ensure that your clients' health and well-being is maintained in the long term. Thank you for listening.